At 11:47 p.m., while finishing the wedding album I made for my son, my phone buzzed. "You're not invited to the wedding." I laughed at first. I truly thought Ethan was joking. Then another text arrived. "Vanessa doesn't want drama there. Please don't come." I sat frozen in my dark kitchen, staring at the invitation I had paid for myself. That was the night I booked a one-way flight to Florida and disappeared without telling anyone. If you've ever been hurt by someone you love deeply, tell me in the comments. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if emotional family stories touch your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. People love to say that a mother's love is unconditional. What they never tell you is how dangerous that can become when you spend your whole life giving pieces of yourself away. My name is Miranda Flores. I was 66 years old when my son told me not to come to his wedding. But the truth is that text message didn't break me overnight. It was only the final crack in something that had already been splintering for years. I used to believe my life had turned out beautifully. Not perfect, never perfect, but beautiful. My husband Daniel and I raised Ethan in a modest brick house in Columbus, Ohio. Daniel owned a small construction company, and I worked as an office manager at an elementary school for almost 30 years. We weren't wealthy people, but our home was always warm, loud, full of laughter and homemade dinners and birthday cakes that leaned sideways because I was terrible at frosting. Ethan was our miracle baby. I had 3 miscarriages before him, 3 tiny graves inside my heart that never fully healed. So when Ethan was born, with thick dark curls and lungs strong enough to wake the entire maternity ward, Daniel cried harder than I did. "You hear that?" he whispered while holding our son. "That's the sound of our future." For most of Ethan's life, he adored me. When he was 7, he used to leave sticky notes on my bathroom mirror that said things like, "You're the best mommy in the universe." When he was 14, he punched a boy in school for making fun of my old car. And when Daniel died suddenly from a heart attack 12 years ago, Ethan held me in the cemetery parking lot while I shook so hard I couldn't breathe. "I've got you, Mom," he said that day. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. After Daniel died, things became harder financially than Ethan ever realized. The construction company collapsed within a year without Daniel running it. I sold equipment, emptied savings accounts, and eventually took a second job doing bookkeeping for a dentist office 3 evenings a week. I was 54 years old, exhausted all the time, and grieving a man I had loved since I was 19. But Ethan was in college then, and I refused to let him see how terrified I was. I still remember eating canned soup for 2 weeks straight so I could send him extra grocery money during finals. I remember pawning the gold bracelet Daniel gave me on our 20th anniversary because Ethan's transmission failed during his senior year. And I remember the day I sold my wedding ring. That one still hurts. Ethan had graduated by then, but he was drowning in debt from bad business investments with friends. He sat at my kitchen table with tears in his eyes, saying he didn't know how he would survive. Mom. I feel like such a failure. I took my ring off slowly and placed it in his hand. "You are not a failure," I told him. "You're just young." The next morning I sold the ring and gave him every dollar. He cried when I handed him the envelope. "I'll pay you back someday." But he never did. Not because he was cruel back then, just because life kept moving. Then came Vanessa Whitmore. At first, I truly liked her. She was beautiful in the kind of polished way people in magazines are beautiful. Perfect white teeth, long, honey blonde hair that never moved out of place, soft cashmere sweaters, even in casual situations. She spoke carefully, like she was always aware someone might be listening. Ethan fell in love instantly. Honestly, I think he fell in love with the life she represented more than the woman herself. Vanessa came from money, real money. Her mother, Megan Whitmore, lived in a gated community outside Chicago and treated lunch reservations like military operations. Their family talked about ski resorts and private wine tastings the way normal people talk about grocery shopping. I noticed the changes in Ethan almost immediately. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things. He started correcting how I pronounced certain words. He stopped inviting me to dinner when Vanessa's friends were there. Once when I hugged him in front of her at a restaurant, he gently pulled away and laughed nervously. "Mom," he whispered, embarrassed. Not in public. That sentence sat in my chest for weeks. Still, I kept trying, because mothers do that. We keep trying long after our hearts begin warning us to stop. When Ethan proposed to Vanessa, I cried with happiness, real happiness. I hosted their engagement dinner in my backyard with white string lights hanging from the fence and homemade enchiladas, because Vanessa once mentioned she loved Mexican food. She barely touched her plate. But Ethan hugged me that night and said, "You always make everything special, Mom." So when they started planning the wedding, I wanted to help. Actually, that's not true. I needed to help. Maybe because somewhere deep down, I thought if I gave enough love, enough money, enough support, I would still matter in Ethan's new life. I gave them nearly $70,000 over 11 months. Venue deposits, floral arrangements, the rehearsal dinner, even the custom invitations. I also co-signed part of the mortgage on the townhouse they bought together because Vanessa's influencer income was unstable. "You're saving us," Ethan told me after closing day. I can still hear his voice saying that. Saving us. What a dangerous sentence that turned out to be. The strange thing is, by then, Vanessa had already started changing toward me. Subtle at first. She'd stare at my department store dresses too long before smiling politely. One afternoon, while helping her address wedding invitations, she took my hand gently and said, "Miranda, maybe don't wear bright colors to the wedding." "We're going for an elegant aesthetic," I laughed awkwardly. But she didn't. Then there were the comments. Tiny little cuts disguised as sophistication. "Oh, that restaurant is probably too expensive for your taste. You're so sweet and old-fashioned. You remind me of those emotional moms in Hallmark movies." Every time she insulted me, Ethan found a way to soften it. "That's just Vanessa's humor. She didn't mean it like that." "You're being sensitive, Mom." Sensitive. Funny how women become sensitive the moment they finally start noticing disrespect. Still, I stayed quiet. Because I love my son more than my pride. And because I truly believe that if I remained patient long enough, things would get better. I had no idea I was standing at the edge of the worst betrayal of my life. The first time I realized Vanessa was deliberately pushing me out of the wedding, I was standing alone inside a bridal boutique holding my purse like an unwanted stranger. And the worst part, I had been the one who paid for the appointment. Vanessa had invited me 3 weeks earlier with one of her perfectly practiced smiles. "We'd love for you to come to the fitting, Miranda." I remember how happy I felt hearing that, ridiculously happy. I even bought a new lavender blouse for the occasion because Ethan once told me purple made me look younger. I arrived 15 minutes early that morning. The boutique smelled like perfume and expensive fabric. Young women floated around carrying champagne trays while soft piano music played through hidden speakers. Everything looked delicate and polished, like Vanessa. A receptionist checked her tablet and frowned slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "The bride's party already went upstairs." "Oh," I answered softly. "I'm Ethan's mother." She gave me an uncomfortable smile. "They told us to start without you." Something inside me sank, but I still smiled politely because that's what women my age were trained to do. We survive humiliation quietly. The receptionist led me upstairs anyway. When I entered the bridal suite, Vanessa was standing on a platform in a stunning ivory gown, while her bridesmaids circled around her taking photos. No one looked happy to see me, especially Vanessa. "Oh," she said dramatically. "I didn't realize you were coming today. I actually thought I'd heard her wrong." "You invited me," I said carefully. There was a tiny pause. Then Vanessa laughed lightly and touched my arm. "You know how chaotic wedding planning gets. My brain is everywhere." Her bridesmaids giggled softly. One of them looked away because even she knew that was cruel. Ethan wasn't there that day. He was supposedly meeting with a caterer. So I sat quietly in the corner while everyone else drank champagne and discussed destination honeymoons and luxury resorts. Not once did Vanessa ask my opinion about anything. Not the dress, not the flowers, not even the rehearsal dinner I was paying for. I remember staring down at my hands thinking, this doesn't feel right anymore. But every time I tried talking to Ethan afterward, he made me feel guilty for bringing it up. "Mom, you're overthinking things. Vanessa's stressed. You know weddings are emotional." Emotional. There was that word again. As if my pain was some embarrassing inconvenience. Things only got worse after that. A month later, Ethan and Vanessa hosted an engagement dinner at an upscale French restaurant downtown. Vanessa insisted both families attend because she wanted everyone bonding before the big day. That night still burns in my memory. I spent nearly 2 hours getting ready, curled my hair, put on my nicest navy dress, even wore the pearl earrings Daniel bought me before Ethan was born. When I arrived, Megan Whitmore looked me up and down before air-kissing my cheek. "Miranda," she said smoothly, "you look comfortable." Comfortable. Rich women have a special talent for insults that sound elegant. Dinner began pleasantly enough. The wine flowed. Everyone laughed loudly. Vanessa kept one manicured hand on Ethan's arm, like she was marking ownership. Then the waiter asked if anyone wanted dessert wine. Vanessa smiled at me across the table. "Oh, Miranda," she said sweetly, "you'd probably pronounce this one better than I can. It's French." The entire table turned toward me. I knew instantly what she was doing. I looked down at the menu, suddenly aware of my accent, my age, my public school education. Every insecurity I thought I'd buried years ago. I attempted the pronunciation anyway. I stumbled halfway through it. Vanessa burst into laughter. Not loud, not cruel enough for Ethan to notice, just sharp enough to humiliate me. "Oh my God," she laughed. That was adorable. A few people chuckled awkwardly. My face burned. I glanced at Ethan, waiting, hoping for him to say something. Anything. But he only smiled tiredly and reached for his water glass. That moment changed something inside me. Not completely, but enough. Because pain becomes different when someone watches you being hurt and chooses silence. Later that night, while we waited for valet parking outside the restaurant, Megan stood beside me beneath the glowing entrance lights. "You know," she said casually, "Vanessa's social circle is very refined. Weddings like this can be difficult for different backgrounds." I stared at her. For a second, I truly couldn't believe another woman was speaking to me that way. "She loves Ethan very much," I answered quietly. Megan smiled without warmth. "I'm sure she does." That sentence haunted me all the way home. By then, I had already started noticing other things too. Vanessa slowly removed me from every important wedding event. First, it was the cake tasting. Oh, scheduling conflict. Then the floral consultation. You probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway. Then family photographs. We're keeping them very intimate. Intimate. Apparently intimate meant everyone except Ethan's mother. I tried telling myself not to take it personally. I tried blaming stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. Vanessa didn't want me around because I reminded her that Ethan came from ordinary people, not wealthy investors, not country clubs, not curated Instagram perfection, just people like me and Daniel, hard-working people, messy people, people who sacrificed quietly. One afternoon, my neighbor, Grace Holloway, came over while I was assembling wedding favors at my kitchen table. Grace had lived next door for almost 20 years. She was one of those women who noticed everything without trying. She picked up one of the small ivory gift boxes and frowned. "You made all these yourself?" I nodded. Vanessa wanted handmade touches. Grace looked around at the ribbons, candles, and stacked decorations covering my dining room. "Miranda," she said carefully, "how much of this wedding are you paying for?" I laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't even know anymore." Grace didn't laugh back. "That girl worries me." The room suddenly felt colder. "What do you mean?" Grace hesitated before answering. "I've seen the way she talks to you." I immediately defended Vanessa. "She's just particular." "No," Grace said firmly. "She's disrespectful." I went silent, because hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to ignore anymore. Grace sat beside me at the table and lowered her voice. "Daniel would hate this." That nearly broke me. I looked down at the tiny ribbon in my hand and suddenly couldn't remember why I was trying so hard to earn love from people who only tolerated me when I was useful. Still, even then, I wasn't ready to admit how bad things had become. I kept helping, kept paying, kept pretending. Because mothers are experts at surviving small heartbreaks. We convince ourselves the next conversation will fix everything, the next holiday, the next apology, the next hug. But the closer the wedding got, the more invisible I became. And somewhere deep inside me, fear quietly began taking root. Not fear of losing Ethan. That had already started happening. No, I was beginning to fear something much worse. That my son was becoming a man I no longer recognized. 3 nights before Ethan sent the text that shattered me, I stayed up until almost midnight finishing his wedding album. I had spent months making it. Every page held pieces of his life. Hospital photos from the day he was born, his kindergarten drawings, little league pictures with missing front teeth and grass stains on his knees, a photo of Daniel teaching him how to ride a bike, while Ethan screamed in terror and excitement at the same time. There was even a folded note I found in one of Daniel's old toolboxes after he died. It was written in Ethan's crooked 10-year-old handwriting. "When I grow up, I want to be exactly like my dad." I cried when I glued that note into the album. Not loud crying, just the kind older women do when nobody is watching. Quiet tears, slipping down tired faces while the rest of the house sleeps. That Thursday night rain tapped softly against my kitchen windows while I tied white satin ribbon around the finished album. I remember feeling exhausted, but strangely hopeful. Maybe the wedding stress would pass. Maybe once all the chaos settled, Ethan would become himself again. Maybe Vanessa would soften once she realized I wasn't her enemy. Hope can make intelligent women ignore obvious warning signs. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed beside me. I smiled automatically when I saw Ethan's name. That's the embarrassing part. Even after months of disrespect, my heart still lit up every time my son called or texted me. I opened the message expecting something ordinary. Maybe a question about table arrangements. Maybe a last-minute favor. Instead, I read, "You're not invited to the wedding." At first, my brain genuinely refused to understand the sentence. I actually laughed softly to myself. What a ridiculous joke, I thought. Then I typed back, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" 3 little dots appeared on the screen, then vanished, appeared again. I sat there staring at them while my stomach slowly tightened. Finally, another message arrived. "Vanessa doesn't want any drama there. Please don't come. Drama." That word hit harder than the rejection itself, as if loving my son too much had somehow become an inconvenience, as if all my sacrifices had transformed into embarrassment. I read the message over and over again until the words blurred. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I called Ethan immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. I sat alone in that dark kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum while rain slid down the windows, and for the first time in my entire life I felt truly unwanted. Not lonely, not abandoned, unwanted. There's a difference. Loneliness hurts. But being deliberately excluded by someone you raised with your own body and soul, that kind of pain rearranges something inside you. I don't know how long I sat there before memories started flooding back against my will. Ethan at 6 years old running into my arms after his first day of school. Ethan at 15 asking me to stay awake until he got home safely from parties. Ethan at 22 holding my hand at Daniel's funeral while both of us shook with grief. "I've got you, Mom." I could hear his voice so clearly that night, and suddenly I realized something terrible. Somewhere along the way, my son had stopped seeing me as a person. I had become background noise in his life, useful, predictable, disposable. Around 1 a.m, I finally stood up from the kitchen table and walked slowly into my bedroom. Daniel's photograph sat on my dresser beside an old candle. I picked up the frame and stared at his face. "You would have hated this," I whispered. The silence afterward nearly crushed me. Daniel had always noticed things before I did, especially when it came to people. Years ago, after meeting Vanessa for the second time, he'd said something strange while we washed dishes together. "She smiles with her mouth, not her eyes." I told him he was imagining things. God, I wish he had been. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Ethan standing at the altar while strangers celebrated around him and his own mother sat alone, somewhere unwanted. At 4:30 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and walked back into the kitchen. The wedding album still sat on the table beside the invitation I had paid to print. I stared at both of them for a very long time. Then something inside me changed. Not dramatically. There was no screaming, no rage, no revenge fantasy. Just exhaustion. A deep, soul-level exhaustion from begging silently for scraps of love I should never have had to earn. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and searched one-way flights from Columbus to Naples, Florida. I don't even know why I picked Florida at first. Maybe because Daniel and I used to dream about retiring near the ocean someday. Maybe because I wanted to disappear somewhere warm and quiet where nobody knew me as Ethan Flores' mother. The flight left the next afternoon. I booked it without giving myself time to think. Then I did something else. Something small that would later change everything. I opened my banking app. For months, Ethan had access to one of my secondary accounts because I occasionally helped him with wedding payments and household emergencies. I had also allowed him authorized access to a credit line connected to the townhouse mortgage. I stared at his name on the screen. Then I removed it. My finger hovered afterward. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might cry again. But no tears came, only clarity. I canceled the shared credit card next. Then I changed the passwords to every financial account I had, one after another, slowly, methodically, like a woman locking doors during a storm. At 7 a.m, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at his name but didn't answer. A voicemail arrived seconds later. Mom, look, can you please not make this harder than it already is? Vanessa is overwhelmed right now. We just need space until after the wedding. Space. I laughed then, not because it was funny, because sometimes pain becomes so enormous your body doesn't know what else to do. I deleted the voicemail. Then I carried the wedding album upstairs and locked it inside the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the same cedar chest where I kept Daniel's letters. Some things no longer deserve to be given away. Around noon, Grace Holloway knocked on my front door carrying banana bread. The moment she saw my face, her expression changed. What happened? I tried speaking calmly. But the second I handed her my phone and she read Ethan's message, her mouth fell open. Oh, Miranda. That was all she said before wrapping her arms around me. And for the first time since the text arrived, I finally cried. Not softly this time, violently. Like 30 years of motherhood were pouring out of me all at once. Grace held me through all of it. When I finally stopped crying, she asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the window, where sunlight had finally broken through the rain clouds. Then I answered with words that surprised even me, "I'm leaving." I left Ohio the next afternoon with one suitcase, a shoulder bag, and a pain so heavy it felt stitched into my ribs. Grace drove me to the airport. Neither of us talked much during the ride. What exactly do you say to a woman whose only child has erased her from the happiest day of his life? The radio played softly while rainwater slid across the windshield. Columbus looked gray and tired that day. The trees bent in the cold wind, and every familiar street suddenly felt distant from me, like I was already becoming a ghost in my own life. When Grace pulled up to the departure terminal, she grabbed my hand before I got out. "You call me every day," she said firmly. "I mean it, Miranda." I nodded. Then she hesitated. "You know this isn't your fault, right?" That question nearly broke me all over again, because deep down, mothers always wonder if somehow it is their fault, if maybe we love too hard, or not hard enough, if maybe one wrong moment years ago quietly planted the seed for future heartbreak. I leaned over and hugged Grace tightly. "I'll be okay," I whispered. At the time, I wasn't sure I believed it. The flight to Naples, Florida felt strangely unreal. The woman beside me spent most of the trip talking excitedly about her grandchildren visiting for spring break, while I stared silently out the window pretending not to cry. Every once in a while, my phone vibrated inside my purse. Ethan. Again and again. I never answered. The truth is, part of me desperately wanted him to say he was sorry. I kept imagining the perfect voicemail waiting for me. "Mom, I made a mistake. Mom, please come home. Mom, I don't want the wedding without you." But the messages never came. Instead, his texts sounded impatient. "Can we please talk like adults? You disappearing is making things worse. Vanessa is really upset. Vanessa is upset." I almost laughed reading that. Imagine being more concerned about a bride's stress than your mother's shattered heart. When the plane finally landed in Florida, warm air wrapped around me the moment I stepped outside the airport. It smelled like salt water and sunscreen and blooming flowers. Ohio suddenly felt 1,000 miles away, emotionally, not just physically. I took a taxi to a small beachfront rental I'd booked online in panic the night before. It wasn't luxurious, just a quiet one-bedroom apartment with pale yellow walls, wicker furniture, and a tiny balcony overlooking the Gulf. But the moment I opened the sliding glass door and heard the ocean waves rolling against the shore, something inside my chest loosened for the first time in months. No wedding spreadsheets. No criticism, no pretending, just silence. I slept for nearly 12 straight hours that first night. No nightmares, no crying, No checking my phone every 5 minutes, hoping Ethan suddenly remembered I existed. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains in soft gold streaks. I made coffee and stood barefoot on the balcony watching older couples walk along the beach hand in hand. For a few peaceful minutes, I forgot everything. Then my phone rang. Ethan. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. A minute later, another call came. Then another. Finally, a text appeared. Mom, where are you? Not are you okay? Not. I'm sorry. Just, where are you? That's when I realized something painful. Ethan still believed I would eventually return and fix everything, because I always had before. Every financial mistake, every emotional mess, every crisis. I had spent so many years rescuing him that he no longer saw me as a human being with limits. I was simply the emergency exit in his life, and for the first time, that exit was gone. Around noon, I walked down to the beach carrying a paperback novel I never actually opened. I sat under an umbrella, listening to seagulls cry overhead while waves crashed against the shore. That was when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Vanessa. I stared at her name for several seconds before opening the message. Ethan says you're ignoring him. Honestly, Miranda, this reaction feels manipulative. We're already under enough stress. Manipulative. I read the word 3 times. Then came another message. You disappearing right before the wedding is making people uncomfortable. People uncomfortable. As if I had committed some social offense by bleeding privately. My hands trembled with anger so sudden it shocked me. Not sadness. Anger. Pure, hot anger. For months I had swallowed humiliation to keep peace in their lives. And still they wanted more. More money. More silence. More obedience. I blocked Vanessa's number immediately. Then, for the first time in my life, I blocked Ethan too. The second I did it, panic rushed through me. What kind of mother blocks her own son? But another voice inside me whispered quietly, what kind of son sends that text to his mother? I sat there for almost an hour, staring at the ocean, while my heartbeat slowly calmed. Then I made another decision. I called Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been Daniel's closest friend since college and our family attorney for decades. He was semi-retired now, living part-time in Sarasota. He answered on the second ring. Miranda. The warmth in his voice nearly made me cry. Hi, Arthur. Well now, he said gently, this is a surprise. I hesitated. Then everything spilled out. The wedding, the text, the humiliation, the financial support, all of it. Arthur stayed silent for a long time after I finished. Finally, he sighed heavily. I was wondering when you'd call me. Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. What does that mean? Another pause. Miranda. Daniel left instructions years ago in case something like this ever happened. I sat upright so quickly my beach chair creaked. What are you talking about? Arthur lowered his voice. Your husband was worried Ethan might someday be influenced by the wrong people, especially after Vanessa entered the picture. Shock rushed through me. Daniel had never told me this. Arthur? I whispered. What exactly did Daniel do? I think Arthur answered carefully. It's time we met in person. We arranged lunch for the next afternoon. After hanging up, I stared at the ocean horizon, feeling suddenly unsteady. Daniel knew something, or suspected something. For 12 years, I had believed I understood every part of my husband's life. Now, I wasn't so sure anymore. That evening, while I cooked shrimp pasta in the tiny apartment kitchen, Grace called to check on me. How's Florida quiet? I admitted. Good quiet or lonely quiet? I looked out the window toward the darkening ocean. I don't know yet. Then Grace's voice softened. Ethan came by your house today. My chest tightened instantly. What did he want? He looked angry, she admitted, and nervous. I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. He asked if I knew where you went. Did you tell him absolutely not? Relief flooded through me. Then Grace added something that made my blood run cold. He also asked if you'd changed any banking information recently. The room suddenly felt very still. Outside, waves crashed softly beneath the Florida sunset. Inside, for the first time, real suspicion began taking shape in my mind. Maybe this had never been only about the wedding. The wedding began collapsing 3 days after I arrived in Florida. Not dramatically at first, just small cracks. tiny fractures beneath the surface of the perfect life Vanessa had spent years curating online. I was sitting across from Arthur Bennett at a quiet seafood restaurant in Sarasota when Ethan's first panicked voicemail came through. "Mom, call me immediately." Arthur glanced at my phone, vibrating on the table. "You're not answering him." I shook my head slowly. I don't know what I'd even say anymore. Arthur studied me carefully over the rim of his glasses. Age had softened him physically, but his eyes were still sharp and observant in the same way Daniel's had been. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes silence tells people more than words ever could." I looked away toward the marina outside the restaurant windows. Boats rocked gently against the docks while sunlight reflected across the water in blinding silver streaks. Florida still felt unreal to me, like I had stepped outside my own life temporarily. Arthur reached into his leather briefcase and placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. "Daniel asked me to keep these safe." My stomach tightened instantly. The folder contained trust documents, property records, insurance papers, and handwritten notes from Daniel. I stared at my husband's handwriting like I was seeing a ghost. "He never showed me any of this," I whispered. Arthur nodded. "He hoped you'd never need to know." I opened one folded note carefully. "If Miranda is ever pressured financially by Ethan or anyone connected to him, protect her first." My chest physically hurt reading those words. He thought Ethan would hurt me someday. "No," Arthur corrected gently. "He thought Ethan might become vulnerable to manipulation." I leaned back slowly, overwhelmed. Daniel had always loved Ethan fiercely, but unlike me, Daniel never let love blind him completely. Arthur sighed and folded his hands together. "Miranda, there's something important you need to understand. Much of the financial support for Ethan's house and wedding came through structures Daniel created years ago. If you withdraw your involvement, the entire arrangement becomes unstable." I blinked at him. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Arthur answered carefully, "your son and Vanessa are far more financially dependent on you than they realize." Almost as if the universe wanted to prove his point instantly. My phone rang again. Ethan. This time I answered. The second I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. "Mom, thank God. Not hello. Not are you okay. Just immediate panic." "What happened?" I asked quietly. He exhaled sharply. "There's an issue with the venue payment." I closed my eyes slowly. Of course. The wedding venue had been partially tied to the credit account I'd frozen before leaving Ohio. "I thought Vanessa's family was handling the final payment," I said carefully. "They were covering part of it," Ethan snapped. "But your account declined the remaining balance." "Your account." "Not Mom. Can we talk?" "Not Mom." "I'm sorry. Just money." I suddenly felt exhausted in a way I can barely describe. "Ethan," I asked softly, "why did you call me Silence? Then, what? Why did you call me? Because you miss me? Or because you need something?" The silence afterward told me everything. Finally, he muttered, "Mom, please don't do this right now. Do this." As if I were the one destroying things. Behind him, I could hear Vanessa yelling faintly in the background. "She can't just disappear." My jaw tightened. Ethan lowered his voice. "Look, Vanessa's stressed out. The florist is demanding another deposit, too." I almost laughed from disbelief. The florist, the venue, the bills. That was what mattered. Not the woman they'd discarded 3 nights earlier. Something cold settled inside me then. Not hatred, clarity. "I can't help you right now," I said calmly. "Mom." "I'm serious, Ethan." His breathing sharpened. "So that's it. You're abandoning me over one misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "You told your mother not to attend your wedding. That wasn't my decision." The words exploded out of him so quickly that both of us went silent afterward. For a moment, I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in months. Fear. Real fear. But then Vanessa shouted something again in the background, and Ethan's tone changed immediately. "Look, we'll talk later." The line disconnected. Arthur watched me quietly after the call ended. "Well," he said softly, "that was revealing." I nodded numbly. For the first time, I truly understood how deeply Ethan had surrendered control of his own life. Not just emotionally, financially too. That evening, the chaos escalated. My phone flooded with missed calls from unknown numbers, wedding vendors, event coordinators, even the bakery. Apparently, Ethan had listed me as a financial contact for multiple services without fully informing me. I ignored every call. Around 7 that night, Vanessa finally emailed me. Not called, not apologized. Emailed. The subject line read, "Urgent payment issue." I stared at it in disbelief before opening the message. It wasn't emotional at all. No acknowledgement of the pain they caused. No regret. Just paragraphs about vendor contracts, social embarrassment, and catastrophic timing. One sentence stood out so sharply it made my stomach turn. "You disappearing is affecting more people than just yourself." I read that line 3 times. Then I deleted the email. An hour later, Grace called again from Ohio. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered immediately. My pulse quickened. "What happened? Ethan and Vanessa were just at your house." I stood up from the balcony chair instantly. "What?" "They looked furious," Grace continued. "Vanessa was crying. Ethan kept trying to unlock the front door. Ice slid down my spine. I changed the alarm code before I left." "Good," Grace muttered, "because they stayed there almost 20 minutes. I gripped the phone tighter. "Did they get inside?" "No." "But Miranda," Grace hesitated. "I saw Ethan trying to look through your office window." The ocean breeze suddenly felt cold against my skin. "Why would he do that?" Grace lowered her voice further. "I don't think they were looking for you." A horrible feeling rose slowly in my chest. They were looking for documents. After we hung up, I sat alone on the balcony staring into the dark Florida night while waves crashed softly below. Everything suddenly looked different now. The wedding drama, the financial pressure, the panic. Had Ethan really only called because he missed me, or because something much larger was unraveling financially? My thoughts spiraled until another call interrupted them. Arthur. "I just received something interesting," he said immediately. My heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" "A notification from one of Daniel's old financial monitoring systems." I frowned. "I don't understand." Arthur paused. There was an attempted access request tied to one of the trust-related property files. My stomach dropped. "By who I can't confirm yet," he answered carefully. "But it originated from Columbus." The room suddenly felt airless. Arthur's voice hardened slightly. "Miranda, I think your son and Vanessa may be trying to access financial structures they don't fully understand." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the Gulf waters. And for the first time since arriving in Florida, fear finally outweighed heartbreak. Because this was no longer just about a wedding. Something much uglier was beginning to surface. The next morning, I woke before sunrise with a knot of anxiety sitting heavily in my chest. For a few peaceful seconds, I forgot everything. Then I remembered Ethan trying to get into my house, and suddenly the ocean outside my balcony no longer sounded calming. It sounded far away. I wrapped a sweater around myself and stepped outside with my coffee. The Florida sky glowed pale pink over the water, while older couples walked barefoot along the shoreline, laughing softly together. Normal people, living normal mornings. Meanwhile, my entire life felt like it was quietly unraveling from hundreds of miles away. At exactly 8:30, Arthur called. "I need you to stay calm," he said immediately. "No one ever says that before good news." What happened? There were multiple login attempts overnight connected to Daniel's trust accounts. My stomach dropped. Successful attempts. "No," Arthur answered. "Because I froze remote access after our meeting yesterday." I sat down slowly in the balcony chair. "Arthur, are you saying Ethan is trying to access the trust I'm saying someone is?" The distinction mattered, and somehow made everything worse, because deep down I still wanted to believe my son wasn't capable of intentionally betraying me. Arthur exhaled heavily. "There's something else you need to know." I closed my eyes. "Just tell me." "The townhouse Ethan and Vanessa live in is legally more complicated than Ethan realizes." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "When Daniel refinanced assets years ago, he placed portions of the property under protective trust structures tied to your long-term security." I stared out at the ocean, trying to process the words. "So Ethan doesn't actually own the house outright? Not without your continued authorization involvement? No." A cold sensation spread slowly through my body. Suddenly, Ethan's panic made perfect sense. This wasn't only about wedding bills anymore. Their entire lifestyle was connected to financial foundations I had unknowingly supported for years, and now those foundations were shifting beneath them. Arthur lowered his voice. Miranda, I need to ask you something honestly. Did Ethan ever pressure you recently about paperwork? My mind immediately flashed back to 2 months earlier. Vanessa standing in my kitchen holding several forms while smiling brightly. Oh, these are just updated mortgage documents. Ethan's busy, so he asked if you could sign quickly. At the time, I barely looked at them. I trusted my son completely. My chest tightened. There were papers, I whispered slowly, but I didn't read them carefully. Arthur went quiet for several seconds. That worries me. Fear prickled across my skin. Arthur, what's happening? I'm not sure yet, he admitted, but I think Vanessa may understand your financial structures far better than Ethan does. After hanging up, I sat frozen for almost 10 minutes. Then my phone rang again. This time it was Ethan. I almost ignored it. Almost. But some foolish part of my heart still needed to hear my son's voice. Mom, he said immediately, sounding exhausted. Where are you? I stayed silent for a moment, then answered quietly. Why? What do you mean, why? Why do you need to know? His breathing sharpened. Because you vanished. I laughed bitterly before I could stop myself. Interesting choice of words. Mom. No, Ethan. You told me not to come to your wedding. What exactly did you think would happen after that? Silence filled the line. Then finally he muttered, I didn't think you'd disappear like this. Disappear like this. As though I'd committed some irrational act instead of protecting my dignity. In the background, I heard Vanessa talking rapidly to someone. Then Ethan lowered his voice. Listen, there are some issues happening right now. Of course there are, I thought. What kind of issues? The bank flagged some things connected to the mortgage. I closed my eyes. There it is. What? The real reason you're calling. That's not fair, isn't it? His frustration exploded instantly. Mom, everything is falling apart over here. Something inside me hardened at those words, because my son still didn't understand. Things had already fallen apart the moment he chose another woman's comfort over his mother's humanity. The money problems were only consequences. I can't help you right now, I said calmly. Why are you doing this to me? The question stunned me, not because it hurt, because he truly believed it. In Ethan's mind, I was the one causing damage by finally stepping away. I spoke very softly then. Ethan, did you ever stop to think about what you did to me? The silence, however, afterward felt enormous. Then came the sentence that changed everything. This isn't all Vanessa's fault. Not, you're right. Not, I'm sorry. Just protection. Always protection. For her. I suddenly realized my son had become emotionally unreachable. Not evil, not monstrous, just weak. Weak enough to let someone else reshape his moral compass. I need to go, I whispered. Mom, wait. I ended the call. Then I cried harder than I had since arriving in Florida. Not because I missed Ethan, but because I finally understood that the boy I raised no longer existed in the way I remembered him. Around noon, Grace called again from Ohio. Her voice sounded tense immediately. Miranda, something happened this morning. Fear rushed through me. What I saw Ethan outside your house again. I stood up instantly. Was Vanessa with him? No. This time it was just him. That somehow hurt more. What was he doing? Grace hesitated. He looked desperate. I pressed my hand against my chest. He tried getting into your garage first. Then he sat in his car for almost 40 minutes. I closed my eyes. I could picture it perfectly. My son parked outside my empty house, realizing for the first time that I wasn't waiting patiently to rescue him anymore. Then Grace added quietly, Miranda, I don't think he knows how to survive without you. That sentence broke something open inside me, because she was right. I had spent decades protecting Ethan from consequences. Every mistake softened, every failure rescued, every financial disaster quietly absorbed by me. And now, for the first time in his adult life, reality was finally touching him directly. That evening, Arthur drove to my apartment with additional documents. We spread papers across the small dining table while thunder rolled outside over the gulf. These, Arthur said carefully, are the original trust protections Daniel created. I scanned pages filled with legal language I barely understood. Then one section caught my eye. Authorized access restrictions in case of financial coercion or elder exploitation. My pulse quickened. Daniel thought this could happen. Arthur removed his glasses slowly. Miranda, your husband adored you, but he also knew how trusting you were. I looked down at the papers with trembling hands. There were notes everywhere in Daniel's handwriting. Protect Miranda first. Do not allow emotional pressure to override safeguards. If suspicious activity occurs, freeze all discretionary access immediately. Tears blurred my vision. Even dead Daniel was still trying to protect me. Meanwhile, our son had just tried accessing accounts behind my back. Arthur leaned forward carefully. There's one more thing. I looked up. The attempted access request yesterday included credentials connected to paperwork filed 6 weeks ago. A chill slid down my spine. What paperwork? Arthur's expression darkened. A refinancing modification request. I stared at him blankly. Then realization hit. The papers Vanessa had me sign in the kitchen, the ones I barely read. Arthur spoke quietly. Miranda, I think someone may have forged or manipulated part of your authorization. Outside, lightning flashed across the dark Florida sky, and for the first time since this nightmare began, heartbreak gave way to something far more dangerous: suspicion. I didn't sleep at all that night. The storm outside rattled the apartment windows while Arthur's words echoed endlessly through my mind. Forgery, manipulation, financial coercion. They sounded like phrases from someone else's life. The kind of nightmare you read about online and immediately think, thank God that could never happen to me. But suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. At 3 a.m, I walked barefoot into the kitchen and made tea I never drank. I just stood there staring at the ocean through the dark window while memories kept replaying differently now. Vanessa asking me to sign papers quickly. Ethan brushing off my questions. The urgency around updating documents. All those moments I dismissed because love had trained me not to doubt my own child. By sunrise, I felt emotionally hollow, not shattered anymore, something colder, more awake. Arthur arrived at 9, carrying another leather folder and 2 coffees. The moment he saw my face, his expression softened. You need rest. I gave a tired laugh. I think I stopped sleeping properly months ago. He sat across from me at the tiny dining table while morning light spilled through the apartment windows. Miranda, he said carefully, before we go further, I need you to understand something important. I nodded silently. None of this makes you foolish. I looked down at my hands immediately, because deep down, shame had already started growing inside me. How could I not see this sooner? How could I spend decades raising a son only to end up here? Arthur seemed to read my thoughts. Trusting people you love isn't weakness, he said gently. Exploiting that trust is the weakness. That sentence stayed with me for a long time. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. These are copies of the refinancing modifications submitted 6 weeks ago. I leaned forward slowly. Even seeing my signature on the pages made my stomach twist. Some pages looked legitimate, others didn't. One signature especially looked wrong, slightly shakier, uneven in places. My pulse quickened. That doesn't look like my handwriting. Arthur nodded grimly. I agree. I stared at the document in disbelief. Someone had forged my name. Not accidentally, not carelessly. Deliberately. My chest tightened so hard I had to press a hand against it. Does Ethan know about this? Arthur hesitated too long before answering. I honestly don't know. And somehow that uncertainty, hurt more than certainty, would have. Because if Ethan knew, then my son had become part of something unforgivable. But if he didn't know, then he was blindly following a woman capable of destroying both of us. Arthur pulled another paper forward. This modification would have transferred additional liability and partial access control if finalized. I blinked at him. In English, please. He sighed softly. It would have made it easier for them to leverage property tied to Daniel's trust. A wave of nausea rolled through me. All those years Daniel spent protecting our future. All those safeguards. And someone had quietly tried slipping around them while smiling at my dinner table. I suddenly remembered something Vanessa once said during a brunch meeting with wedding planners. You know, she laughed casually. Older people never read paperwork. That's why banks make billions. At the time, everyone laughed, including me. Now the memory made my skin crawl. Arthur leaned back in his chair. There's more. Of course there is, I thought bitterly. He slid a printed bank activity report toward me. These access attempts weren't random. I scanned the pages slowly. Dates, times, account requests, repeated activity connected to trust documentation. Then one line froze me completely. Authorized access request. Vanessa Whitmore, device ID. I stared at the name for several seconds without breathing. She accessed this herself. Arthur nodded once, or attempted to. I looked away immediately because suddenly I wanted to cry again. Not from heartbreak, from humiliation. I had welcomed that woman into my home, fed her, defended her, helped pay for her dream wedding. And all the while she'd apparently been circling my finances like a vulture. I don't understand, I whispered. Why would Ethan allow this? Arthur's expression turned sad. Because people in love often confuse loyalty with blindness. That hit painfully close to the truth. Ethan had spent months defending Vanessa no matter how cruel she became. Every insult, every exclusion, every manipulation. And I had kept making excuses for him because mothers are experts at protecting their children from ugly truths, even when those truths are standing directly in front of us. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Ethan. I almost deleted it without listening, but something stopped me. His voice sounded exhausted and scared. Mom, please call me back. A long pause followed. Then quietly Vanessa says, You're trying to ruin us, but I don't know anymore. My heartbeat slowed. For the first time, doubt had entered his voice. Small, fragile. But there. I found out the mortgage paperwork got frozen, he continued, and Vanessa's been acting really weird about the trust stuff. Trust stuff. He sounded like a child describing explosives he accidentally found in a garage. Then came the sentence that made my stomach ache. Mom, did I miss something? I closed my eyes tightly. Because underneath everything else, Ethan still sounded lost. Not evil, lost. Arthur watched me silently while I lowered the phone. You hear it now, don't you? He asked softly. Hear what? The difference between manipulation and panic. I frowned slightly. Arthur folded his hands together. Vanessa sounds strategic. Ethan sounds reactive. I hated that he was probably right. The rest of the afternoon blurred together in paperwork and legal explanations. Arthur began strengthening account protections while quietly documenting everything connected to the suspicious refinancing activity. At one point, he looked up from his laptop and asked carefully, Miranda, has Vanessa ever been alone in your office? I let out a slow breath. Many times. I suddenly remembered walking in one afternoon months earlier and finding Vanessa standing beside my filing cabinet. She smiled instantly. Oh, I was just looking for tape. At the time it seemed harmless. Now every memory felt poisoned. By evening my head throbbed from emotional exhaustion. Arthur packed his folders slowly before leaving. Then he paused near the door. There's something Daniel told me shortly before he died. I looked up immediately. Arthur's voice softened. He said you loved with your whole heart, and that one day someone might mistake that kindness for weakness. Tears burned my eyes again. But he also said something else. What Arthur smiled sadly. He said if you were ever pushed too far, you'd eventually become impossible to control. After he left, I stood alone on the balcony, watching the sunset bleed orange and pink across the Gulf waters. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel powerless anymore. Heartbroken, yes, but not powerless, because slowly, painfully, the truth was beginning to emerge. Daniel had seen danger long before I ever did. Vanessa wasn't just trying to exclude me from a wedding. She had been positioning herself around my life financially for months. And somewhere back in Ohio, my son was finally starting to realize the woman he planned to marry might not be the person he thought she was. But none of us understood yet just how ugly things were about to become. 2 days before the wedding, everything exploded. Not publicly, not yet, But behind closed doors, panic was spreading through Ethan and Vanessa's life like fire under dry wood. And for the first time, I wasn't the one running in to save them. I was sitting at a small outdoor cafe near the beach when Grace called me just after noon. The second I answered, she whispered, "They're at your house again." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Who? Ethan and Vanessa. And Miranda, her voice tightened nervously. They brought someone with them. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. Who? A locksmith. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the cafe patio. "What, I'm serious," Grace said. "They've been trying to get inside for 20 minutes. My hands started trembling immediately. The image hit me so hard I could barely breathe my own son standing outside my house, trying to break into the home where he grew up. The home where I kissed, scraped knees, and celebrated birthdays and cried after Daniel died. "Did they get in?" I asked quietly. "No," Grace answered. "The locksmith left after Ethan realized he'd need legal authorization." Relief flooded through me so sharply it made my knees weak. Then Grace added, "But Vanessa is furious. Of course she is. Because for the first time in her life, a door wouldn't open just because she smiled at it." I sat back down slowly while Grace continued speaking. I could hear them arguing from my driveway. My heartbeat quickened. What were they saying? Grace hesitated. Vanessa kept asking Ethan where the trust documents were. The trust documents. Not family photographs. Not concern for me. Documents. My stomach turned. "And Ethan," I whispered. "He looked overwhelmed," Grace admitted softly. "Honestly, Miranda, he looked scared." I closed my eyes briefly. For one painful moment, I pictured my little boy again, the child who used to run into my room during thunderstorms because he thought I could protect him from anything. Now he was standing outside my locked house beside a furious woman searching for financial paperwork. How had we gotten here? After hanging up with Grace, I immediately called Arthur. He listened silently before exhaling heavily. "This is escalating faster than I expected. What do we do?" "For now," Arthur answered calmly, "we document everything." That sentence made reality settle over me in a completely different way. This wasn't just family conflict anymore. This was becoming evidence. Later that afternoon, Arthur arrived carrying additional reports from a private financial investigator he occasionally worked with. At first, I thought he was overreacting. Then I saw the documents. Several recent credit inquiries had been linked to Vanessa and her younger brother, Tyler Whitmore. There were also traces of attempted lending applications connected to property valuations involving my home. I stared at the pages in horror. They were planning something. Arthur nodded grimly. "I believe so." The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. "You think they wanted the house?" "I think," Arthur said carefully, "Vanessa understood your financial vulnerability long before you did." That sentence cut deeply because it was true. Women like Vanessa notice weaknesses quickly. Loneliness, guilt, love, especially maternal love. She knew I would sacrifice almost anything for Ethan, and somehow she'd learned how to use that against me. Arthur slid another printed page toward me. "This came from your exterior security system." I frowned. "I forgot I even had cameras." "Most people do," Arthur said dryly. The image showed Ethan standing outside my front door earlier that morning, head lowered, hands trembling slightly. He looked exhausted. Then another still frame appeared. Vanessa, arms crossed aggressively, face cold with anger. Even frozen in a photograph, her expression looked frighteningly entitled. Another image showed her pointing toward my office window. My stomach dropped. She knew exactly where to look. Arthur nodded slowly. Yes. Then came the final image. Tyler Whitmore, stepping out of a black SUV while holding a folder. I stared at him blankly. What was he doing there? Arthur's mouth tightened. That's what concerns me, because Tyler had always unsettled me. He was Vanessa's younger brother, 30 years old, charming in a reckless way, constantly jumping between failed business ideas and vague investment opportunities. Daniel used to call him a smiling hurricane, the kind of man who entered rooms carrying chaos behind his teeth. And now he was standing outside my house, looking for financial documents. I suddenly felt sick. That evening, something happened that changed everything. Ethan called again. This time I answered immediately. He sounded breathless. Mom, where are you? I ignored the question. Why were you at my house with a locksmith? Silence. Long silence. Then finally, how did you know that? Answer me, Ethan. His breathing became uneven. We just needed some paperwork. Another silence. Then quietly, Vanessa and me. I closed my eyes. What paperwork? The trust documents, some mortgage files. There it was. Finally. The truth. No pretending anymore. I spoke carefully. Why do you need them? Ethan sounded frustrated now. Because everything is frozen, I stayed silent. He continued rapidly. The bank flagged the refinance process. Vendors are threatening legal action. The venue manager says if we don't resolve the payment issue by tomorrow, they're canceling everything. Behind his panic, I heard something else too. Desperation, real desperation, but still not remorse. Not once had he asked if I was okay. Not once had he apologized. He only sounded terrified that the life he built was collapsing. Mom, he whispered finally, please just help us. Us. Always us. Meaning him and Vanessa, never me. I swallowed hard. Did Vanessa forge my signature? The silence afterward was immediate and terrifying. Then, what? I repeated the question more firmly. Did Vanessa forge my signature on refinancing documents? Ethan sounded genuinely shocked now. What are you talking about? My heartbeat slowed slightly. Maybe he truly didn't know. But before I could say anything else, another voice suddenly exploded in the background. Vanessa. She's lying. She screamed loudly enough for me to hear clearly through the phone. She's trying to manipulate you. Then the line muffled, as if Ethan had pulled the phone away. I heard arguing, sharp, chaotic. Then Ethan came back breathless. Mom! Vanessa says Arthur Bennett is filling your head with paranoid nonsense. I laughed softly then. Not kindly. Interesting. What? The only people panicking right now are the people trying to access my money. That hit him hard. I could hear it. Mom, please, he said weakly. I just want this wedding to happen. And suddenly I understood the tragedy of it all. Ethan still thought this was about the wedding. He still couldn't see the deeper betrayal underneath everything. The manipulation, the financial exploitation, the emotional cruelty. He was desperately trying to preserve the fantasy while standing inside the ruins already. Before hanging up, I asked one final question. Ethan, if Vanessa asked you to choose between me and her right now, what would you do? His silence lasted only 2 seconds, but sometimes 2 seconds can destroy an entire lifetime. I ended the call without another word. That night, while waves crashed outside my apartment balcony, Arthur called again. His voice sounded darker than before. We found something. Fear tightened instantly inside me. What? There's evidence Vanessa recently contacted a luxury assisted living consultant in Columbus. I froze completely. What Arthur's tone sharpened. She specifically requested information about long-term placement options for elderly parents with property assets. The room tilted around me. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. She was planning this, I whispered. Arthur didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't need to. Deep down, we both already knew. I wish I could say the truth shocked me. But the reality is, by then, some part of me had already begun preparing for something terrible. Still hearing Arthur say the words out loud nearly stopped my heart. She was looking into assisted living facilities. Arthur's voice remained calm and measured. Yes. I sank slowly into the kitchen chair while cold panic spread through my body. The tiny Florida apartment suddenly felt unbearably quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. Waves crashing outside. My own breathing growing uneven. She wanted to put me in a home, I whispered. Arthur paused carefully before answering. We don't know the full plan yet, but I did. Mothers know. Not because we're psychic, because we recognize intentions long before we're emotionally willing to accept them. And suddenly dozens of strange moments from the past year rearranged themselves inside my memory, like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. Vanessa constantly asking about my health, questions about my retirement paperwork, comments like, you shouldn't be living alone at your age, Or, a smaller place would probably be easier for you eventually. At the time, I thought she was pretending to be caring. Now every word sounded predatory. Arthur continued speaking softly. The consultant she contacted specializes in high-asset elder transition planning. I almost laughed from disbelief. What a beautiful professional phrase for stealing an old woman's independence. Tears burned behind my eyes, but this time I refused to let them fall. No, I whispered. No more crying over this. Arthur watched me carefully, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something different in his expression. Not pity, respect. Daniel would be proud of you right now, he said quietly. That nearly undid me anyway. After we hung up, I walked onto the balcony and stood there staring at the dark ocean. The wind whipped my hair around my face while memories flooded me one after another. Vanessa offering to help organize my financial paperwork. Vanessa insisting I simplify my accounts. Vanessa joking that older people were easier to scam online. My God, she had been telling me exactly who she was all along. I just didn't want to see it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was Tyler Whitmore. I almost ignored it immediately. Then curiosity got the better of me. The text message was short. You should know Vanessa's hiding things from Ethan, too. My pulse quickened instantly. Before I could respond, another message appeared. She's been talking to investors behind his back. Investors? I stared at the screen, confused. Then Tyler sent one final message. She thinks once you're out of the picture, the property situation gets easier. My hands began trembling. Out of the picture. Not dead necessarily. Just removed. Contained somewhere quiet and manageable, like unwanted furniture. I blocked Tyler's number immediately afterward. Not because I didn't believe him, because I suddenly realized the entire Whitmore family functioned like scavengers circling opportunity. Even now, Tyler was probably betraying his own sister for leverage. I barely slept again that night. At sunrise, I finally made a decision. I was going back to Ohio, not because I wanted revenge, and not because I wanted to save the wedding. I was going back because I needed to look my son in the eyes before this entire disaster destroyed what little remained between us. When I told Arthur later that morning, he didn't argue. I suspected you would. I need to face this. He nodded slowly. Then we do it carefully. The rest of the day became a blur of preparation. Arthur coordinated legal protections quietly behind the scenes while I booked my flight home for the following morning, the same day as the rehearsal dinner. At one point, while reviewing documents together, Arthur suddenly froze while reading something on his tablet. What? His expression darkened. We found another issue. Of course we did. There was an unauthorized inquiry involving your medical records. I stared at him blankly. My medical records, Arthur nodded grimly. Someone requested cognitive health verification information through a private elder care intake system. A cold wave swept through my entire body. They weren't just planning financially anymore. They were building a narrative. Old, emotional, possibly unstable. The kind of story people use when they want to control elderly relatives for their own good. I felt physically sick. She was preparing to say I couldn't manage my own affairs. Arthur didn't answer immediately, because silence said enough. That afternoon, Ethan called again. This time, I answered before the first ring finished. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. Mom, where are you? I'm safe. He exhaled shakily. That's not what I asked. I closed my eyes briefly. Even now, he still sounded more anxious than remorseful. Then his voice lowered. Vanessa says you've been talking to lawyers. There's a reason for that. Long silence followed. Then finally, she says you're trying to sabotage us because you're upset about the wedding. I laughed softly. Not bitterly this time, just tired. Ethan, do you actually believe that? He didn't answer, and that silence hurt more than shouting would have. I swallowed hard before speaking again. Did Vanessa tell you she looked into assisted living facilities for me? Dead silence. Then, what? His reaction sounded genuine, confused, shocked. She what? I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead. Arthur had been right. Ethan didn't know everything. Ethan. I whispered, there are things happening around you that you refuse to see. No, he said quickly. No, that doesn't make sense. She also tried accessing trust documents. She said the lawyer needed financial clarification. She forged paperwork. That's impossible, but his voice cracked slightly on the last word. And there it was again, doubt. Tiny cracks beginning to form inside the fantasy Vanessa built around him. I heard movement in the background. Then Vanessa's voice suddenly appeared sharp and furious. Who are you talking to? Ethan muttered something I couldn't hear. Then Vanessa grabbed the phone. Miranda, she snapped coldly. Dropping every trace of politeness, for the first time you need to stop poisoning Ethan against me. I stood perfectly still. No, I answered quietly. You've done that yourself. Her breathing sharpened. You're emotional and unstable right now. There it was. The narrative. Unstable. Exactly what Arthur warned me about. I felt something inside me settle completely then. A terrifying kind of calm. You made a mistake, Vanessa. What mistake? You assumed being older made me weak. For the first time since I'd known her, Vanessa fell silent. Then she hissed quietly. You have no idea what you're destroying, I almost answered. Neither do you. But instead, I ended the call. That evening, I packed my suitcase slowly while the Florida sunset painted the apartment gold. And for the first time in weeks, I no longer felt like a grieving mother hiding from heartbreak. I felt like a woman walking toward the truth, no matter how ugly it became. Before bed, Arthur called one final time. There's something you need to hear before tomorrow. Fear tightened inside me again. What now? Arthur's voice lowered. We recovered part of an audio file connected to Vanessa's cloud backup. My stomach dropped. What's on it? He paused, then quietly answered. A conversation about you. I didn't sleep at all the night before I returned to Ohio. Not because I was afraid of what I might find, but because I already knew nothing about my life would ever look the same again. Arthur's last words kept repeating in my mind like a warning I couldn't silence. A conversation about you. At 4:12 a.m., I finally gave up pretending I could rest. I sat on the edge of the bed in my Florida apartment listening to the ocean outside as if it belonged to another version of my life. The version where I was still just a mother trying to be loved, not a woman uncovering betrayal. My suitcase was already packed. Simple clothes, a few personal items, and Daniel's small leather journal I had taken from the cedar chest, the one thing I refused to leave behind. When I finally stepped out of the apartment just before sunrise, the air felt different, heavier, like the world itself was holding its breath. Arthur was waiting for me in a black sedan outside the building. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me for a long moment as if trying to decide whether I was truly ready for what came next. You don't have to do this today, he said gently. I tightened my grip on my bag. Yes, I replied, I do. The drive to the airport was silent except for the low hum of the engine. Florida disappeared behind us slowly. Palm trees, sunlight, ocean air, all of it fading like a life I had briefly stepped outside of. At the airport, Arthur handed me a folder. This is everything we can legally confirm so far, he said. But Miranda, once you land, things will escalate quickly. I nodded. I know. He studied me carefully. You sound different. I almost smiled. I feel different. That was the truth. Not stronger exactly, but clearer, as if grief had burned away all the soft illusions I had been living inside. Before I boarded, Arthur spoke one last time. Whatever happens today, don't let them pull you back into confusion. I met his eyes. They already did once, I said quietly. Never again. The flight to Columbus felt shorter than I expected. Maybe because I spent most of it staring at Daniel's journal in my lap. Inside were notes he had written years ago about finances, trust structures, and something he had labeled simply, "Protect Miranda if I am gone." My fingers traced those words again and again. When the plane landed, I felt something tighten deep inside my chest. Ohio air was colder than Florida, sharper, familiar in a way that almost hurt. Arthur met me at baggage claim. This time, he didn't look calm. He looked alert, focused. Everything is already moving, he said as we walked. Ethan is at the rehearsal venue. My heart skipped. And Vanessa Arthur hesitated. She arrived earlier this morning with her family. Of course she did. Always performing control. Always staying one step ahead. As we drove through Columbus, I noticed how normal everything looked. People going to work, traffic lights changing, coffee shops opening. No one knew that my life was about to fracture in public. Arthur broke the silence. There's something you need to understand before we go in. I turned toward him. He handed me his tablet. On the screen was a recording transcript. Vanessa's voice. My stomach tightened immediately. Arthur spoke quietly. This was recovered from a synced cloud backup tied to her device. I read the first lines, then the second. Then I stopped breathing. It wasn't just about me. It was strategy, planning, timing. Vanessa's voice came through the text like ice. She trusts Ethan completely. That's the entry point. Another line. Once the refinancing is approved, Miranda becomes legally irrelevant. My hands began to shake. Arthur watched me carefully. There's more, he said. I continued reading. She's emotionally unstable, easy to redirect if necessary. That word again, unstable. The same weapon used to erase women who ask too many questions. But then I saw something worse. A second voice. Tyler Whitmore. She won't fight it if Ethan pushes hard enough. She never has before. I looked up sharply. Arthur nodded. It confirms coordination. My stomach turned. This was planned, I whispered. Arthur didn't answer immediately, because there was no other interpretation left. We arrived at the hotel venue just before noon. From the outside, everything looked perfect. White floral arrangements, elegant guests arriving in expensive clothing, soft music playing, the illusion of celebration. But I could feel it now, the tension underneath, the lies dressed up as beauty. Arthur leaned closer. We wait until I signal. I nodded. My hands were steady now, strangely steady, because something inside me had already accepted the truth. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was exposure. Inside the venue, Ethan stood near the entrance in a gray suit, looking exhausted. When he saw me, his face changed instantly. Shock, relief, fear. "Mom," he said quietly. Vanessa appeared beside him within seconds. Perfect smile, controlled posture, but her eyes sharpened when she saw me. So the performance began. "Miranda," she said smoothly, "I hope you're here to support us today." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without denial clouding my judgment. "You recorded conversations about me," I said calmly. The room around us didn't notice yet, not fully. But Ethan stiffened immediately. Vanessa didn't react, not outwardly. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "I don't know what you're referring to." Arthur stepped forward. "That's not going to work anymore." Silence spread subtly around us. Guests nearby began noticing the shift. Something was wrong. Ethan looked between us confused. "What is going on?" I turned to him slowly. "Ask her." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Ethan. She's trying to sabotage your wedding." But her voice wasn't as smooth anymore. There was strain underneath it now. Pressure. Arthur held up his tablet. "I think everyone here deserves context." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Excuse me," Arthur didn't hesitate. He pressed play, and her voice filled the room. Clear. Cold. Calculated. Every word she had spoken about me echoed through the speakers like a confession she never intended to be heard. Guests turned. Whispers started. Ethan froze. I watched his face carefully. Watched the moment the world he believed in began collapsing in real time. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be real." Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "That's edited." But no one believed her tone anymore. Because truth has a sound people recognize instantly when it finally arrives. Arthur spoke quietly. "There's also financial documentation." He placed printed pages on a nearby table. Forgery comparisons, account logs, attempts to access trust structures. Ethan stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Then slowly, painfully, he looked at Vanessa. "Tell me that's not true." For the first time, her mask cracked. Just slightly. "Ethan, I was protecting us." That sentence was everything and nothing. Because protection never requires deception. Ethan stepped back. His voice broke. "You tried to move my mother's silence." That silence answered everything. And in that moment, something inside Ethan finally shifted. Not fully, Not cleanly, but irreversibly. He turned toward me, his voice barely audible. Mom, I didn't know. I nodded slowly. I know. Tears filled his eyes immediately. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was real. Vanessa stood frozen, realizing the room had turned completely. Her control was gone, and for the first time she looked exactly what she had always been afraid of appearing as, exposed. Arthur stepped forward again. This ends today. No one argued. Not anymore, because truth once spoken aloud changes the atmosphere in a room permanently. As guests slowly began to leave in uncomfortable silence, Ethan walked toward me. This time, no hesitation, no distance. Just a broken voice asking one thing. Can we fix this? I looked at my son for a long moment. Not the boy I raised, not the man he had become under influence, but something in between, and I answered honestly. I don't know. It was the first honest thing I had said to him in a long time, and somehow that was where healing began. The room didn't explode the way people expect in movies. There was no screaming at first, no dramatic collapse, just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that spread through the wedding venue like smoke after a fire. Guests stood frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a ceremony or a disaster. Vanessa was the first to move. Not toward me, not toward Ethan, toward Arthur. You have no right to play that here. She snapped, her voice sharper now, stripped of elegance. Arthur didn't flinch. I have every legal right, he replied calmly, especially when fraud and coercion are involved. The word fraud hit the room like a physical blow. I felt Ethan stiffen beside me. Vanessa turned immediately to him. Ethan, tell him to stop this. She's twisting everything. Her hand touched his arm, but for the first time, Ethan didn't react to her touch. He looked at her differently now, like he was seeing her for the first time without filters. Without love blindness. Without excuses. Vanessa, he said slowly, did you try to access my mother's financial accounts? A flicker crossed her face. Too quick, too controlled. I was helping with paperwork, she said smoothly. Arthur stepped forward again, placing another set of documents on the table. Then perhaps you can explain these. They were printed access logs, bank requests, authorization attempts, all tied directly to her device. The room shifted again. Whispers grew louder. Guests were no longer pretending this was normal. Vanessa's composure began to crack. I was doing what was best for Ethan, she said sharply. That sentence changed everything, because it revealed intention, ownership, control. Ethan stepped back slightly. What does that mean? He asked quietly. Vanessa hesitated. For the first time, she looked unsure of how much truth she could safely reveal. Then she tried another angle. She's manipulating you, she said, pointing at me. Your mother has been influenced by him. Arthur let out a quiet breath. That's interesting, he said. Because everything we've presented is verifiable, he turned slightly toward Ethan. Would you like to see the original banking freeze request your mother submitted? Ethan swallowed hard. Yes. Arthur handed him the document. I watched my son read it, line by line. His expression changed slowly. Confusion, then shock, then something worse. Realization. She froze everything he whispered. I nodded once. After I was told I wasn't invited to your wedding. That sentence landed differently in the room now. No longer emotional, just factual. Ethan looked down at the paper again. His hands were shaking slightly. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. She's punishing you, she said urgently. That's not normal behavior, Arthur cut in immediately. Actually, it is a standard legal protection response in suspected coercion scenarios. Vanessa turned on him. You're not her therapist. No, Arthur replied calmly. I'm her legal counsel. The word counsel changed the energy again. This was no longer family conflict. It was documentation versus defense, truth versus narrative. Ethan suddenly spoke again. Mom, did you think I was involved in this? The question was quieter this time, more fragile. I looked at him carefully. No, I said honestly, but I didn't know who you were listening to anymore. That hurt him. I could see it immediately. But it was the truth. Vanessa suddenly laughed once, sharp, uncontrolled. This is ridiculous, she said, turning to the room. She's turning a wedding into a courtroom. But no one was on her side anymore, not even her own mother, Megan Whitmore, who had just arrived and stood near the entrance with a frozen expression. Tyler Whitmore wasn't there. He had already disappeared. That alone said everything. Arthur leaned slightly toward me. "It's time," he said quietly. I nodded. Then I stepped forward. The room went still. Not because I raised my voice, but because people can sense when something irreversible is about to be said. I looked at Ethan first, then Vanessa, and finally the room. "I didn't come here to destroy your wedding," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. Even I noticed that. "I came here because someone tried to destroy my life quietly while smiling in my kitchen." Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, but I continued. "Financial manipulation, forged documents, attempts to access accounts that were never hers." A murmur spread through the guests. I turned slightly toward Ethan. "And the worst part is, I don't think you even knew the full truth." Ethan flinched, because that part mattered more than anything else. Vanessa stepped forward aggressively now. "Stop acting like a victim," she snapped. "You've been controlling him for years." Something inside me went still, not anger, clarity again. "No," I said quietly. "I've been protecting him from consequences he wasn't ready to face." Silence. Arthur placed one final document on the table. "This is the assisted living consultation request Vanessa submitted under Miranda Flores' name." The room froze. Even the music in the background seemed to fade. Ethan looked at it, then at Vanessa, then at me. His voice cracked. "You planned that." Vanessa's silence answered before her words did. "It was temporary," she said finally. "Just until things stabilized." My laugh this time was soft, almost sad. "You were going to relocate me," I said, "and take control of my assets while I was gone." She didn't deny it. That was the moment everything collapsed. Not loudly, but completely. Ethan stepped back as if the air itself had turned toxic. "I don't understand," he whispered. Vanessa reached for him again. "Ethan, I did this for us." He pulled away. For the first time. The movement was small, but it ended everything. Arthur spoke quietly beside me. "It's over." Vanessa looked around the room one last time. The guests were already leaving. Whispers followed her. Phones were being put away. Truth was now public and irreversible. She turned suddenly toward me. Her voice dropped. "You think you've won?" I looked at her calmly. "I don't think this is winning," I said. "I think this is consequences." That hit harder than anything else, because consequences don't argue. They arrive. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the venue without another word. Her heels echoed across the floor like final punctuation. When she disappeared through the doors, something shifted in the room. Not relief, not celebration, just emptiness. Ethan stood still for a long time, then finally turned to me. His voice was almost childlike. "Mom, I didn't know." I nodded slowly. "I believe you." That made him cry. Not loudly, just quietly breaking down in front of everyone. The boy I raised was still somewhere inside him, buried under influence, under manipulation, under fear of losing love. Arthur gave us space. The guests were gone now. Only empty chairs and untouched flowers remained. Ethan finally spoke again. "I let this happen." I stepped closer. "No," I said softly. "You were led into it." He shook his head. "That's not enough." I paused. Because he was right. It wasn't enough. But it was the beginning of something. "You're going to have to rebuild who you are," I said quietly. He looked up at me. I don't know how. For the first time in a long time, I touched his shoulder, not to fix him, not to rescue him, just to remind him I was still here. "Then start by learning the truth," I said. Outside, the last guest had left. The wedding was over. Not ruined, not interrupted, finished. And in the silence that followed, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't losing my son, not completely, but I was finally stopping the version of him that had been built on lies. And sometimes that is where healing begins. The venue was empty by the time the last guest left. Only the faint smell of flowers and spilled champagne remained clinging to the air, like a memory that refused to disappear. Ethan sat alone in one of the front chairs, still in his suit, his head lowered, as if the weight of everything had physically pinned him down. I stood a few feet away, unsure whether to move closer or give him space. For the first time in years, there was no urgency pulling me toward him, no fixing, no rescuing. Just silence between a mother and her son after a storm neither of us fully understood until it broke. Arthur quietly gathered the remaining documents into his briefcase. "I'll give you both a moment," he said softly before stepping away toward the exit. The doors closed behind him with a heavy finality, and suddenly it was just us. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, I keep replaying everything." He lifted his head slightly, eyes red and exhausted. I don't understand how I didn't see it. I sat down in the chair beside him, not too close, not too far. "I think you saw pieces of it," I said gently. "But you didn't want them to be real." That made him flinch. Because it was true. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Vanessa said you were trying to control me," he whispered. "She said you were jealous, that you didn't want me to move on." I stayed quiet, because I had heard every version of that lie before. From people who confuse love with possession. From people who need a villain to justify their choices. "I wanted you to be happy," I said finally. "I just didn't want you to disappear from yourself while doing it." That sentence hung in the air between us. Ethan exhaled shakily. "I thought I was building a life," he said. "You were," I replied. "But not the one you think." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not as a background figure, not as an obligation, but as someone real. "Did I hurt you?" he asked quietly. The question was simple, but it carried years inside it. I didn't answer immediately, because honesty mattered now more than comfort. "Yes," I said finally, "more than once, but not always intentionally." His eyes filled again. "I don't deserve you." I shook my head. "That's not how this works, Ethan." He let out a broken laugh. "It feels like it should." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't punish but forces reflection. Eventually, he spoke again. "Vanessa said she was helping me protect assets from you being emotional." I turned my head slightly. "And you believe that?" He hesitated. "Yes." Then softer. "Because I was scared I'd lose everything if I questioned her." That was the most honest thing he had said all day. And it revealed something deeper. Ethan hadn't just been manipulated. He had been afraid. Afraid of losing love. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of disappointing the person he thought would complete his life. "I should have protected you," he whispered suddenly, "instead of letting her pull me away from you." I looked at him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "You were never supposed to protect me, Ethan. You were supposed to grow into your own life. That landed differently." He nodded slowly. "I don't know who I am without her." The words were fragile, lost, like a man standing in a house that no longer felt like his. "That's not something you fix in a day," I said gently, "or a week, or even a year." He swallowed hard. "So what now?" That was the real question, not about Vanessa, not about the wedding, but about everything after collapse. I leaned back slightly. "Now you stop listening to people who benefit from your confusion." He let out a shaky breath. "And you?" I looked at him. "I stopped trying to save people who refuse to see me." That silence was heavier than before, but it wasn't painful this time. It was honest. A few minutes later, Arthur returned. "We should leave before reporters arrive," he said quietly. I frowned. "Reporters?" He nodded. "Vanessa's mother has already been contacted by someone in the local press. The story is starting to circulate." Ethan closed his eyes. "Of course it is." Arthur looked at him calmly. "This doesn't have to define you, Ethan, but it will if you let it." Ethan stood slowly. His movements felt older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. As we walked toward the exit, he stopped suddenly. "Mom," he said quietly. I turned back. He hesitated, then spoke again. "I don't know how to fix this." I nodded slowly. "I know." He looked down at the floor. "But I want to try." That was the first real step forward. Not apology, not justification, intention. I didn't respond immediately, because promises meant nothing without change. Finally, I said softly, "Then start by learning how to stand without needing someone else to hold you up." His eyes lifted toward me. And for the first time in a long time, there was something different in them. Not dependence, not denial. Awareness. We left the venue together, but not as the same people who entered it. Outside, the air was cooler. cleared after the emotional storm inside. Arthur opened the car door for me. Before I got in, Ethan spoke one last time. "Mom, are you coming back home?" I paused, looked at the building behind him, at the place where everything had collapsed. Then I answered honestly, "I don't know what home means right now." That wasn't rejection. It was truth. He nodded slowly as if he understood more than he could say. We drove away in silence, but it was no longer the silence of destruction. It was the silence after truth has finally been spoken. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't the end of my relationship with my son, but it was the end of the version of it that required me to disappear to keep it alive. I expected the days after the wedding to feel like collapse. Instead, they felt like silence, a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that had followed me for months, but something cleaner like air, finally moving through a closed room. Ethan didn't call for 2 days, then 3. For the first time, I didn't chase the silence. I let it exist. Arthur checked in regularly, but even he seemed to understand that nothing more could be done in the immediate aftermath. Sometimes, he told me over the phone, people need distance before they can face themselves. I was starting to understand that. On the 4th day, I woke early and sat on my Florida balcony watching the sunrise. The ocean looked different now, less like escape, more like reflection. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived here weeks ago in tears and shock. Something inside me had shifted permanently, not healed, but rearranged. That morning, I got a message from Grace. "He's back in Ohio, alone." Just that. No judgment, no drama, just fact. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I asked, "How is he?" Her reply came quickly, quiet, lost, but not angry anymore. That word stayed with me. Not angry anymore. Anger had been Vanessa's fuel. Fear had been Ethan's. But silence. Silence meant something else entirely. I booked a flight back to Ohio 2 days later, not because I had forgiven everything, but because I needed to see what remained when illusions were stripped away. Arthur met me at the airport again. This time he didn't look tense. He looked thoughtful. "There's something you should know before you see him," he said as we walked to the car. I tightened my grip on my bag. "What now?" "He's been trying to understand the financial structures Daniel set up. That surprised me. He asked for access." Arthur nodded. Not access, understanding. That small difference mattered. A lot. "He's been reading through documents on his own," Arthur continued, asking questions, not avoiding them. I stayed quiet, because that wasn't the Ethan I had known for the past year. That was someone slowly waking up. We drove to Columbus in silence. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Same brick walls, same small porch Daniel and I used to sit on during summer evenings. But it felt different now. Empty, in a more honest way. Ethan opened the door before we even knocked. He looked thinner, tired, but present. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then he stepped aside. "Hi, Mom." Just 2 words, but softer than before. I walked inside slowly. The house was quiet. No Vanessa, no chaos, just him. We sat in the living room, where so many memories had once lived. Ethan kept his hands folded tightly in his lap. "I read everything Arthur sent me," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know." He swallowed hard. "I didn't realize how much of it I didn't understand." "That's not unusual," I said gently. He looked up at me, but I should have. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with truth. "I keep thinking about the paperwork," he continued. "The signatures, the access attempts." His voice tightened. "And I can't tell any more what I missed because I was blind, or what I ignored because I was afraid." That honesty mattered, more than anything else he had said so far. I leaned forward slightly. "Fear does that," I said quietly. "It doesn't just blind you. It convinces you that blindness is safer." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't know how to fix what I did." I looked at him carefully. "You don't start by fixing," I said. "You start by understanding." He exhaled shakily. "Vanessa hasn't contacted me since the venue. I wasn't surprised." "She left," he added quietly. I nodded. "She never intended to stay for consequences." Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. "I thought I was building a future with her. You were building a version of yourself she could control, I said gently. He flinched slightly but didn't deny it. That mattered too. A long silence followed. Then he spoke again softer. Did I really hurt you that badly? The question was no longer defensive. It was searching. I chose my words carefully. Yes, I said. But not because you stopped loving me. He looked confused. Then why? Because you stopped seeing me as a person you needed to protect your relationship with truthfully. That landed deeper than anything else. He lowered his head. I didn't know how to balance both. I know, I said. And I did, because I had raised him in a world where love often meant sacrifice without boundaries. We sat like that for a while. No urgency, no accusations, just two people trying to understand what survived after everything else fell apart. Eventually, Ethan spoke again. I don't want to be that version of myself anymore. I studied him quietly. That version, I said, was built on fear. You can't fight it by hating yourself. He looked up. Then how? By learning how to stand alone without panicking. That sentence seemed to stay with him. A knock came at the door later that afternoon. Grace. She stepped inside carrying a small basket of food like she always did when things felt uncertain. She paused when she saw me, then smiled softly. Good, she said simply. No explanation needed. She looked at Ethan. You look exhausted, she added. He let out a tired laugh. I feel like I've been awake for a month. Grace nodded. That's what truth does sometimes. The three of us sat in the kitchen for hours, not fixing anything, not resolving anything, just existing in a space that no longer required pretending. At one point, Ethan asked quietly, Do you think I can rebuild this? I didn't answer immediately, because honesty mattered more than comfort. Finally, I said, I think you can rebuild yourself. The rest comes later. He nodded slowly. I want to try. And for the first time, that didn't sound like fear talking. It sounded like responsibility. That evening, I stood on the porch alone before leaving. The air was cool, familiar. Ethan stepped outside behind me. Mom, I turned. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. Thank you for not giving up on me completely. I studied him for a long moment. I didn't, I said. I just stopped letting you hurt me while I stayed. That truth didn't hurt him. It grounded him. And maybe that was the beginning of something neither of us fully understood yet. As I drove away with Arthur later that night, I looked out the window at the passing Ohio streets. Nothing looked the same, but maybe that was the point. Some endings don't destroy love. They remove everything that was pretending to be it. It took Ethan almost a year to come back, not just physically, but emotionally. And even then, he didn't come back as the son I used to know. He came back as someone quieter, more careful, more aware of the space he had once taken for granted. We met in Florida this time, not in Ohio, not in the house filled with ghosts of arguments and silence. He arrived alone, no Vanessa, no promises behind him, just a small suitcase and tired eyes. When I opened the door of my apartment, I didn't feel shock. I felt something steadier, recognition. He stood there for a moment, unsure if he should step forward. Hi, Mom, he said softly. I nodded. Hi, Ethan. That was all we needed at first. No dramatic apology, no collapsing into tears immediately, just two people learning how to exist in the same emotional space again. We sat on the balcony later that evening, listening to the ocean. The same ocean that had held my breakdowns months earlier now sounded different, less like escape, more like continuity. Ethan finally spoke. I went to therapy, he said quietly. I turned slightly toward him. I know. He looked surprised. You do? Arthur had told me, but I didn't say that. Instead, I nodded. I figured you would eventually. He exhaled. It was harder than I thought, he admitted, not blaming someone else for everything. That honesty mattered more than anything he could have rehearsed. I kept thinking about Vanessa at first, he continued, about how she lied, how she manipulated things. He paused, then added quieter. But eventually, I had to ask myself why I let it happen. That was the real question, the uncomfortable one, the one most people avoid forever. I didn't interrupt. Ethan looked down at his hands. I think I was addicted to being chosen, he said. By her. By people like her. It made me feel important. His voice cracked slightly, and I confused that with love. The honesty in his words carried weight, not guilt, awareness. I nodded slowly. That's something a lot of people never learn to admit. He looked up at me. I didn't realize how much I stopped seeing you, he said. Not just as my mom, but as a person. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was honest. I see it now, he added quietly, and I hate that I didn't before. I took a breath. You don't fix that by hating yourself, I said gently. You fix it by doing better from now on. He nodded slowly. That's what I'm trying. We sat in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that no longer demanded repair, just presence. Eventually he spoke again. Do you remember when I was little? And I used to think you could fix anything. I smiled faintly. I remember. He gave a small, sad laugh. I think I carried that into adulthood, he said, except I expected it from you instead of myself. That hit something deeper, because it was true. I had become his safety net without realizing I was also becoming his limitation. I don't expect you to fix me anymore, he added. I looked at him. That's good, I said softly. He nodded. But I do hope, he hesitated, that I can still be part of your life. That question was different. Not entitlement, not assumption, just hope. I studied him for a long moment, then said carefully, You can't come back to the same place you left. He nodded immediately. I know. But you can build something new, I continued, if you're willing to do it differently this time. His eyes filled slightly. I am. Months passed after that, slowly, carefully, without rushing anything that had been broken for too long. Ethan got a stable job in a smaller firm. He moved into a modest apartment. He stopped trying to fix everything at once and started learning how to live without chaos defining him. Sometimes he called just to talk, not to ask for help, not to explain problems, just to talk. And I learned something too. I learned that love does not require self-erasure, that boundaries are not cruelty, that walking away from manipulation is not abandonment, it is survival. One afternoon, Ethan visited me again in Florida. We walked along the beach in silence for a while before he spoke. I ran into Vanessa once, he said. I glanced at him, and he shrugged slightly. She didn't say much. Neither did I. I nodded. Did it feel different? He thought about it. Yes, he said finally. Like something that used to control me doesn't anymore. We kept walking. The waves rolled in steadily beside us. Eventually he added, I don't hate her anymore. I looked at him. That's good. I just understand now. That was enough. Understanding was what replaced obsession. One evening before I left Florida for a short trip, Ethan sat with me on the balcony. The sky was turning orange. Soft. Calm. I think I finally get it, he said quietly. Get what? He looked out at the ocean. That you didn't leave me, he said. You just stopped disappearing for me. That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected, because it was the truth I had been moving toward all along. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. That's exactly it. He turned toward me. I'm glad you did. I smiled faintly. So am I. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to, because some relationships don't return to what they were. They evolve into something more honest, less fragile, more real. Before he left that night, Ethan paused at the door. Mom. Yes. He hesitated. Thank you for surviving me. I shook my head gently. That's not how I'd put it. He smiled slightly. How would you put it? I looked at him for a moment. Thank you for learning how to come back. He nodded slowly, and this time when he left, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like balance finally returning to something that had been broken for too long. After he was gone, I sat alone on the balcony, watching the ocean again, the same ocean that had witnessed my collapse, my anger, my awakening. Now it simply moved forward, unapologetically. And for the first time, I understood that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like distance, sometimes it looks like truth, and sometimes it looks like a mother finally choosing to exist fully in her own life again, without apology, without permission, and without disappearing for anyone ever again.